All right. Well, I think maybe some more people will still be joining, but I'm going to get started with some housekeeping announcements. Welcome, everyone. This is Louis Marvin. I'm with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, or the NSVRC. This is our third session in this webinar series. We are so glad to be partnering with MenHealing and with the Boston area Rape Crisis Center to offer these sessions. The first two sessions are posted on our YouTube playlist, and I'll share a link in the chat in a moment. That's coming to you, I think, in all of your reminder emails, so you should have it. But the first session, Men as Survivors, and the second session, Reframing Trauma, the recordings of those in both English and Spanish are both up on that playlist. And so the third session today is Identity and Intersectionality of Male Survivors. And before I pass it to Kenton, just a couple other quick announcements. I did address this, I think both sessions, but just another reminder that people have been asking if they have to attend each session to participate in the full series. You certainly do not. We'd love to have you for these live sessions. However, that's the purpose of those recordings. Your colleagues who aren't registered yet can still register and catch up on the first two sessions and then this one as well. So please invite people you think might still like to join. We have closed captioning available today. If you use the captions button in Zoom, we are offering live Spanish interpretation. So once again, if you've joined since I've last said that, please do make sure to select a language, and there are instructions in the chat now about how to do that. Thanks also to our live ASL interpreters who are supporting the webinar today. You can contact me in the chat if you're having technical difficulties with anything related to Zoom or accessing captions or interpretation. One note that I want to remind, or again, invite people to remember is to please use the Q&A function in Zoom for your questions. We're going to have about an hour of Kenton facilitating the session and going over content. And we have a half hour at the end there reserved for questions and answers. And so we want to make sure that you use that function for questions, and then use the chat for responding to the prompts that our presenter will be giving. So that'll help us make sure that we get to your question. We are recording, and I think that's it for me at this point. And I want to thank Kenton and also Sharon and Jim for being here. And I'll pass it to you, Kenton, to take it from here.
Okay, well, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are located. My name is Kenton Kirby, and I am fortunate enough to work for, be on the facilitator team for an amazing board called MenHealing. Today, I just want to confirm today we're going to be talking about identity and intersectionality with male survivors. And so before I jump into who's in the room, I just want to talk a little bit about the goals for our time together. We're going to be goals to address the ways identity and social context of sexual harm and impact trauma and healing for male survivors. We want to understand the complexity of male sexual harm. We want to acknowledge that sexual harm affects individuals regardless of gender. Highlight that societal stereotypes and norms may make it challenging for male survivors to come forward to seek help. And we also going to talk a little bit about the intersectionality of identity. Emphasize that male survivors come from diverse backgrounds, including race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and social economic status. We're also going to discuss how intersecting identities can influence the experience of sexual harm and access to support services. So today, the objectives, we're going to explore survivors, their identities impact the healing for male survivors, learn how social constructs impact the way survivors seek support, And then also in our past 2 sessions, we talk about how our own biases as practitioners influence our work with male survivors. Uh, So I want to have my colleague Sharon. She's going to help me out with this section here because it's a lot of you here. It's over 100 folks. So I want to know who's in the chat. So please put in the chat your name, pronouns, identities you would want acknowledged in the space, and anything else you would like to share about yourself. And in the interim, while you all are doing that, I would welcome Jim, our Executive Director of MenHealing, to introduce himself while you all are putting that stuff in the chat. And then Sharon can do the same for Bark. If you can get off screen, Jim.
Yes, this is Jim Struby, Executive Director of MenHealing. So proud of our team and all the work we've been able to do with survivors for all these years. We've been doing weekends of recovery since 2001. Just had our 102nd event last October. And thank you all for being here to take in this training.
Thank you, Jim. Sharon, can you introduce yourself and then tell us what's happening in the chat?
Yes, I am Sharon, she, her, hers. I am the Senior Director of Community Outreach, Awareness, and Prevention Services at the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. I also have the privilege of being a facilitator for MenHealing and a part of this webinar series as a joint partnership. So looking in the chat, we have sexual harm advocates from Florida, Arizona, Utah, West Virginia, Alabama, Mississippi, Idaho, Iowa, Wisconsin, Maine, Vermont, Michigan, and Japan.
Wow.
And I would invite people to continue to look at the chat and to recognize and see who is here with us and the identities that folks are sharing. And I'll pass it back to you, Kenton.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I'm so happy that I'm doing this with you and Jim. This partnership has been wonderful, and the work we get to do with MenHealing is such a gift. So before we jump into the conversation on intersectionality and identity, just want to kind of do a little review from some of our previous series. So there are some current definitions of sexual harm. There's one from the Federal Bureau of the FBI, right? And if we look at this one is like legal terms, right? So the definition is penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. That's the FBI's definition from 2014. If you think about that, it's all very much about parts. Doesn't mention consent. It's the CDC definition is a little different. And the CDC's definition is any sexual contact committed against someone without that person's freely giving consent. It's less about parts and more about harm and consent. Is important with, we'll talk about that in a bit, but in terms of reframing, it's important to work with men survivors to teach them the term sexual harm and talk about its meaning for them. It's also important to talk about consent, is the ability to say yes and no, where both choices are equally available without harm or consequences, and its meaning for them. So yes, like I said, any questions, please put them in the Q&A. Any responses or reactions, you can put them in the chat. So once again, staying kind of referring back to some of our previous trainings, just to kind of ground us here. So current prevalence of sexual harm on men. Nearly 1 in 4 men in the US experience some form of contact sexual violence in their lifetime. About 1 in 3 men experience contact sexual violence, physical violence, and/or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetime. And about 1 in 14 men in the US were made to penetrate someone during their lifetime. Remember that these statistics that we have are not accurate, but these are the stats we have. They may not be accurate because the prevalence of men who don't actually disclose the harm that's come to them. So I want to point out that last step. Made or forced to penetrate is an action that is not part of that FBI definition I mentioned, but can lead to a lot of confusion on the part of the male survivors. And if a man experienced that as part of their harm, it needs to be addressed. Why the term sexual harm is so important. When someone has a sexual experience they don't want or are forced into any kind of sexual act by another person, they've experienced sexual harm. So, some common reactions to sexual harm done to men and boys. See, so identity questions that emerge for boys and men who are survivors of sexual harm, such as victimhood, masculinity, victimhood, acknowledging that they're experiencing sexual harm does not diminish one's strength or worth as a person. Encourage reframing the concept of victimhood to one of survivorship, resilience, and empowerment. Then we have this notion of masculinity, how societal expectations of masculinity may impact how male survivors perceive and respond to their experiences of sexual harm. We want to challenge the traditional notions of masculinity that equate strength with emotional stoicism and silence, and instead promote vulnerability and emotional expression as courageous and empowering. And then sexual orientation, recognizing that sexual harm can occur regardless of sexual orientation, and that is never justified or acceptable. We want to address the unique challenges faced by male survivors who may fear additional stigma or discrimination due to their sexual orientation. And then the reactions. The reactions being normalizing a range of emotional and behavioral reactions that male survivors experience in response to sexual harm, which include shock, guilt, anger, shame, and numbness. And also think about our self-worth. Want to think about the impact of sexual harm on their self-worth and self-esteem. Recognize that survivors may struggle with feelings of worthlessness, shame, and self-blame. We also want to validate the inherent worth and dignity of male survivors, emphasizing that their value is not defined by their experiences of trauma. We want to promote self-compassion and self-care practices to help these survivors nurture a positive sense of self-worth and resilience in the face of adversity. By addressing these questions, we can create a more inclusive and supportive environment for boys and men who are survivors of sexual harm, empowering them to heal, thrive, reclaim their identities on their own terms. Let me keep. And our last session was about reframing, right? So I want to do a little bit of a review of that. So being mindful of the language we use. So and versus but, right? It's when we say and, it gives us an opportunity to hold both realities, but actually shuts off one. I love and hate the person that caused me harm. We can feel multiple things at once, and we do not have to justify that. Want and need versus should, supposed, have to, right? Want and need keeps us out of judgment and allows for empowerment of the individual first based on their ideas, etc. Sexual harm doesn't happen. It is done to people. It is a choice by one person to hurt another. Therefore, it's not an accident. It's a choice. It is done. What happened to you versus what is wrong with you. We do not want to pathologize. We want to empathize with people, understanding that we have no idea what's going on in their lives. And it's important that we to understand what's going on then by asking what happened to you. And we also want to really in our work employ the tool of safe enough. We use the term safe space a lot, but we cannot guarantee full safety for folks. We can honor safe enough or safer in the moment. And I would even add, the safe enough is even in the relationship, not just the space, the working relationship between the survivor and the practitioner. We also want to be gender inclusive, when gathering information, not making any assumptions of people's perceived assumed gender identities. So, Sharon, anything coming in the chat? Any comments, reactions before I move on?
No.
No? Okay. All right. So now to the topic, understanding identity and intersectionality. We're going to learn about the two separately and then put them together. right? So identity, it's characteristics, beliefs, qualities, and experiences that make a group or individual unique. It encompasses various aspects such as race, gender, socioeconomic status, etc. It's also shaped by internal and external factors. It plays a significant role in shaping an individual's sense of self, belonging, and how they interact with others in the world around them. My identity is I am a man. I'm a male, but I'm also a Black man, which are two identities that have different perceptions in the world. Identity can be fluid and intersectional, meaning it interacts with other aspects of a person's identity, influencing their experiences and perspectives. Those internal and external factors impact how I move in the world and how I make myself available for various experiences, or justifying things that happen to me or not justifying them. So intersectionality. This is a concept developed by Kimberly Crenshaw, American civil rights advocate, where it's the interconnected nature of social categorizations, right? These different categories that we're in, it also challenged traditional frameworks of understanding identity by promoting a more holistic perspective. It's about holding all of our identities together and understanding that each of those identities are going to impact us differently depending on it allows that individuals may simultaneously experience multiple forms of discrimination or oppression due to the intersection of their various social identities. It also highlights the importance of understanding how different forms of oppression intersect and compound, leading to unique experiences of privilege or marginalization. So I mentioned earlier, I am a man, but I'm a Black man. So I'm part of one of my identities is rooted in privilege, being a man, but I'm also Black and African American, which is not a privileged group. So they both intersect with one another, where one minute I'm benefiting from the privilege and other times I'm not because I'm Black. Intersectionality emphasizes the need for a more nuanced, inclusive approach to social justice and recognizes that and addresses the complexities of identity and power dynamics. Intersectionality challenges traditional single-axis frameworks of understanding identity and discrimination by promoting a more holistic perspective that considers the overlapping influences of various social identities. So I want to ask y'all in the chat, right? I'm going to put you all to work. Share how in your roles from Florida to Maine to Japan, how many roles do you hold your participants' individual identities in your work? And how do you consider the external factors for your clients' participants in your work? So anything you may have to offer to these two questions would love to hear what you all experience. And Sharon, if there's anything coming in the chat, you let me know.
I will. Just waiting
Thank
for
you.
people a little bit of time to type it in.
Yeah. I would say in my experience, we talk about this a lot. I dive in the fact that I don't know and I want to learn from the person.
Kent, we did have a request if you could please repeat the questions.
Okay. How in your current role do you hold your clients' individual identities in your work? And the second one is, how do you consider the external factors for your clients in your work?
I think we're also having a request to simplify the questions a bit.
Oh, sure, no problem. All right. So how do you hold your clients' identities? How do you hold your clients' identities in your work? Like, just very simple. How do you honor their identities?
Someone said, I understand client's identity by using a questionnaire and interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Someone else shared, I asked them what the preferred identities are and be respectful of it.
Mhm.
Also shared, I try to always introduce my pronouns and use gender neutral pronouns when talking about survivors. Teaching and learning from survivors, being culturally aware, avoid assumptions, don't make assumptions. I ask what they need and listen. The identities of my clients frequently inspire me to reframe how I offer resources and support on the crisis line where I work. Do you feel comfortable calling the police rather than asking, did you call the police?
Mm.
Using name tags, identities, and pronouns. And again, just listen fully to people and hear the nuances of what they're sharing and listen for cultural cues.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Sharon. Sharon, how do you hold your clients' identities in your work?
That's a great question. I think it's important to acknowledge that the identities that they share might change moment to moment and situation to situation, and that my identities might impact that, and also recognizing that I bring my identities in. I do think it's important to have transparent, honest conversations, recognizing that being a survivor is only one identity that folks have. And in our work, understanding how do the identities that they do have and carry, how do those impact how they see themselves as a survivor or how they see what was done to them as sexual harm and how they understand the intersectionality of that. So always using curiosity to understand what they're bringing into the space and what they need.
Yeah, I love the term curiosity.
I learned that from you.
Yeah. And I love curiosity because it keeps us centered and keeps us open to more possibilities when we're hearing people's stories and we're bearing witness to their experiences. Because that is, I think, being curious is a way to avoid, it's an anecdote to getting in our biases, right? That we all have. So when we hold our clients or participants' identities through all those great ways that you all put in the chat. So what about the external factors that our clients, how do we hold their identities, right? While also considering the world that they live in. And I know with my work with boys and men in New York, here in Brooklyn, I have to acknowledge, I hold the societal expectations of how they're expected to socialize around their harm, but I give an opportunity to kind of show love and show kind of and have a soft landing in how I acknowledge external factors for my clients. I'd love to hear like how the external world, outside world impacts your clients when you're doing your work with them from identity lens. Assumptions. Thank you, man. Thank you, Maris. People are very upset if they're not dressed the way. All right. Let's see. Is there anything else coming in the chat?
There are a few questions, but I'm going to encourage people to please put those questions in the Q&A so we can answer that later.
Yeah.
People are saying it's really important to really stay abreast of resources for survivors in a variety of socioeconomic situations and keeping cultural considerations in mind when offering resources and referrals. And again, never assume, value all, be open. Those are the things coming through the chat.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sharon. Appreciate it. All right, so I want to move on. Randy, I try to jump with leading questions. Blind spots. Okay. All right. I'm gonna keep moving. So that's okay with everyone. So here's some of the challenges, right? The collective socialization challenges, right? Where we are socialized within a world that is grounded in whiteness, white supremacy culture, which impacts this notion of intersectionality, because intersectionality is about holding oppression and privilege all at the same time. So I think of the societal beliefs and stereotypes acknowledge the pervasive influence of social beliefs and stereotypes surrounding masculinity, victimhood, and sexual assault, specifically when it comes to male survivors. Discuss how these beliefs contribute to the underreporting of male sexual assault and that minimization of male survivors' experiences. I've had sessions with young male survivors telling me about situations that they've gone through, and they don't identify it as sexual harm. But then the collective socialization group is saying, oh, that's not that. This is different. We're men, which is unfortunate because there's not an opportunity for them to heal, or they just dive in further within their identities around these societal beliefs around these harms. And the impact on male survivors, how it's the ways in which these societal beliefs and stereotypes exacerbate the trauma experienced by these survivors, including feelings of shame, guilt, and isolation. Another intersectionality challenge is recognize that male survivors come from diverse backgrounds and face intersection forms of oppression and marginalization based on factors such as race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status. And I mentioned collective socialization earlier, but it's the collective socialization in perpetuating harmful beliefs and attitudes towards male survivors' sexual harm. Discuss how societal norms and expectations shape individuals' understanding of gender, power dynamics, and consent, influencing both perpetrators and bystanders' responses to sexual violence.
Ken, I'm going to jump in for a second.
Sure,
I
sure.
want to acknowledge that there is questions and conversations happening in the chat. And again, I want to encourage folks that to put your questions into the Q&A. We actually have time a little bit later. And I want to just give people the opportunity to be present in the training, and maybe your questions will be answered. And if not, we will have time later on to get to the questions and the discussion that is happening in the chat. So I didn't want to ignore, I wanted to acknowledge it. And I want to say, well, we can get to that discussion during the Q&A.
Thank you, Sharon. Appreciate it. So common reactions on this sexual harm done to boys and men: shame and guilt, anger, fear, sadness, confusion, disbelief, and fear of closeness. The fear of closeness with other men or masculine identified individuals, that isolation and invisibility, over or under functioning with men, and thinking that they're the only one that this was done to, believing that something is wrong with us, minimizing the situation that it happened, and exaggeration, emasculation or exaggeration of masculinity are some common reactions to sexual harm done to boys and men. Let's see. Right. So some stereotypes and myths. Let's see. There. All right. Keep going. I'm sorry, y'all. Some stereotypes and myths. How do we challenge these stereotypes to create a safe space for male survivors with all of their identities? We want to challenge those stereotypes. We want to, social expectations of masculinity and obstacles to healing. And the stereotypes that impact opportunities for healing for male survivors. I think of some of the men I've worked with over the years, where they are told that if something happened to them, why did you let it happen to you, as opposed to, are you okay? What do you need? So also understand that the whole self can foster the healing process. We got to recognize that this is the whole person. We got exploration of intersectionality in the healing process for male survivors. Oh, sorry about that. That ahead of me. And we talked about this earlier, being curious in our work, being this observer self. Sharon talks about the observer self. I talk a lot about that curiosity. Observer self, meaning just kind of looking around saying, oh, that's what you're telling me. It's not about assessment, it's just about pulling more information for folks to hear what it is from their perspective. And it keeps us from a space of like, instead of, okay, this sounds very familiar to previous participants and clients I've worked with, here's the intervention. It's the acknowledgement that this individual, while maybe this sounds similar to previous folks, the intervention, the feelings, the experience is different for that person, simply for the fact that that is a different person than the other one. And then we also want to explore tools male survivors already have internally, right? That's tapping into their resilience, tapping into their networks that they already have. Because sometimes folks don't know what they have unless it's highlighted to them. I always say it's we need to see the forest through the trees, right? And in my work, I always say, my one question I always ask in response to things, I go, that sounds interesting. Please tell me more. I'm not completing the thread. I'm just going, that's interesting. Tell me more. And that's how I kind of try to remain curious while holding all of those identities for someone and reflecting what I'm hearing from them. All right. And also, you know, identify the unique challenges, constraints that male survivors may possess in their healing process. You want to almost like reframe their experience around what's happened to them. I mentioned earlier, each story coming here is unique. We want to be exploratory. We are not the experts. The folks that we get to work with, they're the experts in their own experiences. We may have some resources. And the term I love using is radical curiosity. Curious to the point of, for me, I say, I'm so curious, I don't know anything unless you tell me. And tell me more. This is interesting. This is unique to you. Tell me more. And doing it in a way where you're present, you are holding space for the person in a way that sees their whole self in all of their identities and the conflicting nuances of those identities. So I think that's really important. Let me see, anything coming up in the chat? Let's see. All right, someone put one of the.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
I got it. Actually, I can read it. Takuro, one of the myths that prevents their healing is that male survivors will be abusers, so they're not supported by sexual assault referral centers. It's and thank you for that. It's you can be, remember I said we can be both end, right? I could cause harm, but I also could be harmed, right? Similar to this is the purpose of intersectionality, holding both sides. And this is an antidote to like white supremacy culture where it's good versus bad, linear processes. With this work, it's kind of opening the nuances where we're acknowledging the reality that people, not one size fits all. And if you think about our bodies, one arm is longer than the other, one eye is bigger than the other, one foot is bigger than the other. So we already are built this way, but yet when we are talking about providing services support, we're almost forced to be in this linear process around it, which I think intersectionality gives us an opportunity to hold all of that. Working with someone who may be a white male and has access and resources, who was a survivor of sexual harm, I can acknowledge that they have access and resources, but I can also see them as a survivor and be able to provide the services and support they need, right? While also understanding that there's other identities that provide some privileges, right? So it's, once again, it's radical curiosity, not one size fits all interventions. We are not the expert, and it's about hearing the stories and being like, this is unique to the individual. And also, when we think about intersect different identities, and intersectionality with our survivors, our male survivors. We want to consider our spaces where we provide service for them, right? You want to be mindful of an awareness that healing is not a linear process. In my work outside of MenHealing, I work in the criminal legal system, and it's a healing in progress is viewed in such a linear way. When everyone here, we're all aware of the fact that a survivor can take 2 steps forward and 5 steps back. But it's important for us to acknowledge and celebrate the 2 steps forward, right? And not judge or shame the 5 steps back. Understand that that is part of the process. And also understanding that healing is to the individual. It's not what we are pushing on our survivors for healing. It's what they need, what they believe they need. And we're there with them, holding their identities, holding all their identities in that space around there, what healing looks like for them. And even if and sometimes we may not agree with it, but we hold space for it. We want to consider these competing identities and the internal and external factors. Everything for survivors are impacted by what's happened to them, how they've processed it, they've been harmed from it, and the world around them. And sometimes that world around them does not give the space for them to, it's not safe enough for them to heal or do the work, right? And in our work as advocates and survivor advocates and counselors, we have to check in on our own biases. We come into this work, many of us come into this work with a story. Like there's some reason we're all here, whether it's a personal story or a certain characteristic of us, like we are people that are caring or whatever it could be. There's something that brought us to this work. And that, if we can use that as a tool to get through the door. But we have to check that tool that got us in the door to ensure that it's not rooted in our biases. And when we are able to do that, we jump from a lens of helping versus serving. When helping, if we can check our bias, where we can work in service of our folks, where service is a relationship of equals. The folks that we get to work with are coming in with needs. We are mutually working with them alongside them with the hope of they'll be able to walk away and leave and continue their healing journey on their own. But we've got to check in on our own biases. What are the things that maybe we do too much, or maybe we don't do enough for one particular survivor versus the other? What is that about? I think that is very important when working in spaces with survivors and being able to hold all of their space, all of their identities in that. And it's not even like holding their identities. It's about acknowledging all of their identities that they bring into the work, but centering their survivorship. And one way we can do this to make sure that we can sustain in this, we gotta take care of our teams. We don't do this on an island working with survivors. We're not on our own. We have to care for our teams because it's vital for sustainability. I always give an example of colleagues working together on a team. One colleague has 6 or 7 sessions back to back to back and hasn't taken a water break or anything like that. Or team care is when your colleague says, hey, you got another one out there. Take a few minutes, I'm gonna go get them started, get some water. Because we are all in this work together where we have to bear witness to folks that are experiencing such harm that we need to make sure that we're all taking care of ourselves. Right. Let me see. Sharon, Jim, any thoughts, anything you would want to add or anything that's coming up for either one of you?
One of the things that I can add, hopefully it's complementary to what you're saying, is that I think sometimes it's hard because we're under such pressure to provide our services. We're overworked, we're overstretched, we got too many things to do. But I think with the identity issue, it's really important that we find a way to maintain humility,
Yeah,
not to rush into having to make assumptions, and a lot of times to ask a open-ended question rather than proceeding as though what we see or what we experience is true. Tell me more about yourself. What should I know about you that I haven't asked or that someone else hasn't asked? And then if we make a mistake in terms of identity, to have the humility to say, I'm so sorry, that was my error. What do we need for safety, for repair?
yeah, thank you, Jim. All right. Sharon, what about you?
No, I think you're doing amazing. I have nothing to add.
Nothing to add? All right. All right. So some more considerations, right? We want to hold space for all identities for this context, male survivors that they live in. That harm, that sexual harm may intersect with social, cultural oppression, right? We want to consider our space for survivors, and we want to be mindful of our bias and check our bias and try to be the best version, as curious as we can be from this observer self, this centered sense of self. I know when I think of the sexual harm, how it intersects with social, cultural oppression. Young folks I work with who may be involved in the criminal legal system, they receive some kind of harm, and because of their identity of being Black or BIPOC, the first instinct, first question is not, are you okay, but what did you do? As opposed to what happened to you, what do you need? So sexual harm definitely intersects social cultural oppression for some groups. And it's important to acknowledge that. So on that note, I think we are doing well. So in the chat, what are some takeaways that come up for you all, that have come up for you? And then we can share some resources. And then we can do the Q&A. What are some takeaways from today's presentation? And I appreciate you all taking time to be here. So, okay, so Crystal says, setting aside of ego in order to better serve survivors and victims. Yeah, I would say like setting aside our reasons for getting into the work can help us better serve survivors and victims, right? Stephanie, the people are experts on who they are, and we need to learn from them, who they consider themselves to be. Yeah. Yeah, stop looking at male as a perpetrator all the time. But also, it can also be both end, right? The reframe, be inclined where they're at, acknowledge their intersectionalities, be aware of my own biases, and keep an open mind. Thank you, SMR. Yeah. I always say, for me, it's easier, it's easier said than done. We have to constantly be saying to ourselves, okay, am I being biased here? What is going on within me that may be getting in the way? Yeah, Karen, avoid the assumptions. Yeah, Tia, ask what happened instead of what's wrong with you. We wanna, because we say what's wrong with you, it's putting it on the survivor, and that's not what we're supposed to do here. Yeah, change our language and reframe questions so we don't victim blame. Yeah, and we sometimes victim blame based on these intersecting identities. So the constant interrogation of our own work, which means that we actually we have to like check our own expertise And then even check that notion of what is expertise, if that's even a thing in our work, right? Because if we're saying we're experts, that means we figured it all out. But we do know that working with people, needs of people change as the world changes. And a perfect example that I feel you all can resonate with is in 2020, we had the global pandemic and we had to completely pivot. Many of us had to pivot to start providing services through Zoom and virtual platforms, right? For survivors of all kinds of harms. And we've shifted that. So that wasn't a need back in 2017, but now it's a need now, and we've had to shift our practice. So are we ever really the experts? We are the holders of information and resources. That doesn't give expertise. So that kind of humility, that like professional humility, I think, gives an opportunity for us to be able to be as present and curious for our participants that come through our doors. All right, let's see. We also want to consider how the external and internal factors impact how survivors receive and respond to services, right? I had a person that would say he wanted to see me, and every time he was scheduled, he would come up with a reason not to show up, all kinds of reasons. And it went on for several weeks. And when he finally started coming, I asked him what kept him from coming initially. He told me, I wasn't sure if you were gonna really be who you say you were gonna be. So essentially he was waiting for me to reject him, because historically, the external messaging he was getting was that whenever I reach out for help, they fail me. So for him, he said, I'm gonna reject you. So being able to be patient with folks, understanding that when they come in, they may have other experiences with the system that have been harmful for them and impacted their trust. And also, male survivors deserve healing resources that consider all their intersecting identities. So MenHealing, we do a number of services for our male survivors, from our flagship weekends of recovery that we do throughout the United States. We've started expanding to do support groups for male survivors, peer-led groups, community groups for their partners. We've responded to the needs of these survivors because we listen to them. We get feedback, we listen to them, and we try to create different avenues and opportunities for healing for our survivors that we're fortunate enough to work with. And we look forward to perhaps collaborating and working alongside many of you, because as our org, we say we are not just providing services for male survivors, we also want to be part of a movement to lift up male survivorship. And this is an amazing group to start that really important work with. So I want to put up some of our website information. We have BARC, MenHealing, and NSVRC's websites. So please check out our websites. The MenHealing site, we have tons of resources, videos that you can check out, accounts from many of our alum who've participated in the weekends, resources. We are really trying to get connected to as many survivors in different ways, because we understand that we can't provide healing resources in just one linear way. So I'm gonna ask Jim. Jim, is there any particular resources within MenHealing you'd like to kind of highlight before we go to Q&A?
Well, I would just accentuate what you just mentioned in terms of our video library, because that is an opportunity to hear in the voices of the survivors themselves talk about their experience, both somewhat about what happened to them and how they found hope and healing. So those are a really rich resource because it's not us talking, it's not the textbooks talking, it's not the research, it's the human beings. And we have a lot of variety in terms of the backgrounds and identities of the survivors featured in those videos. It's a Voices of Healing video collection.
Yeah, absolutely. And our goal is to really work alongside folks. We don't want to hold all of our resources. We want to be part of a larger movement in lifting up male survivors' voices. So please check out our resources. Sharon, is there anything you want to talk about when it comes to BARC, when it comes to some of the work y'all are doing?
Our website does offer, again, videos on self-care. And so I might encourage folks to take a look at this. As sexual harm advocates, we are impacted by the work we do, and that can also impact, that's one of our identities, and can impact our work with survivors if we aren't taking care of ourselves. So I encourage folks maybe to take a look at those and utilize them for themselves, as well as a large part of the work that we do is also teaching survivors how to take care of themselves, and so referring them to that as well. I like the term taking care of ourselves as is shared by Audre Lorde versus the idea of self-care. I think that term has become very trendy, so I wanted to acknowledge that and take us back to the idea of Audre Lorde saying taking care of ourselves, and really recognizing the quote is, and I'm probably going to misquote it and I apologize, taking care of ourselves is not selfish. It is an act of preservation and it's an act of warfare. So I just think it's important to bring the idea of our identity as taking care of ourselves into this space and recognizing by us doing that, we can work better with survivors. And also too, that we can change systems if we are willing to, again, take care of ourselves, take care of our clients and recognize what is needed. And so I think that was a little tangent, but that's something that always comes up for me when we have these conversations.
I always thank you for that, Sharon. Thank you, Jim. I always say, if we don't care for ourselves in the work, we're going to bleed on our folks that we are fortunate enough to work with. So it's our responsibility to care for ourselves in this work. Tap into our community of practitioners. Also, when we take care of ourselves in the work and acknowledge the reality of it, it keeps us connected to our survivors' humanity. Because when we're doing this work, it's the antidote to getting us to looking at the folks we are fortunate enough to work with as just another case file. Because they're not just another case file. That's an individual with nuances, identities, nuanced needs. So that's why it's really important to care for ourselves in this work so we don't become that precipitating factor that gets in the way of someone's healing. And on that note, I would like to say thank you for listening to me talk for a little bit. And Sharon and Jim, thanks for chiming in. But I think at this time, we can go to any questions that are coming up.
Thanks, Kenton.
No problem. Should I stop sharing my screen, Louis, or should we just keep it as is?
I think you can keep it up. Yeah,
Okay.
maybe go back to the website screen, or if people wanted to, yeah, thanks. We do have a few questions open in the Q&A, so thanks to folks for going there with your questions. So the first one is, do you find that your clients have an issue with using victim? So I think this person is saying, like, with using that term, the term victim.
Jim and Sharon, I'll go first from my experience, and then Jim and Sharon, you can chime in after if you want to add anything. I know for me in my work over the years between MenHealing and other spaces, working with men, I actually don't shy away from the term victim because I stick with this and not but. Like, you're a victim and you're strong. The victimization was a thing that happened. It's not who you are. So for me, I've always kind of done that And I feel like in my experience with my clients, when I've used that term in the way that I use it, where it's like, it's not shaming, then it lands a little differently in my experience. Sharon, Jim?
Yeah, I think it's always important to have a discussion with your client about the term that they want to use to identify themselves in the situation. I also explain that I tend to use the term survivor,
Yeah.
but I'm willing to change that with each individual person. I think the term victim has a place.
Yeah.
I think it's important for folks to know that something was done to them, that they've experienced a crime. I think very often, even today, I've been doing this work over 20 years and people still believe this, that it's the survivor is the one to blame. And I feel like if we recognize survivors as being victim of a crime, as something being done to them, and we help folks to also recognize that, then maybe we'll begin to put the responsibility and onus where it belongs. So I think there is a place for the term victim. And again, but always having an open conversation with survivors about that. But I think the point is getting folks to recognize that survivors of sexual violence are victims of crime.
Yeah. Thank you, Sharon. Jim, what about you?
What I would add, kind of building on what Sharon was saying, I think it's important that we don't sidestep that word victim, because the way our culture has been biased is that men can't be victims, boys can't be victims. It's an oxymoron to be man, boy, and be victim. So I think we need to use it in the sense of saying we have to be honest and realize that boundary was crossed, your consent wasn't secured, and therefore you were victimized. And again, the reframe is to be able to talk about it as not a personality deficit, not a scar, but an injury, the reality that we can be injured as well. And then when we can, we're lots of times put where we have to check off the list of the questionnaire. And the more we can engage the person we're working with tell me about how you see yourself, tell me about your experience, tell me about your identity. And then as we hear their response, we might be able to guide someone to say, whatever the framing is, does that mean this? Does that mean that? I want to be sure I'm clear in what you're saying. And we may be able to guide people into the reality that it's actually empowering and healing if we can have the honesty of claiming, yes, I was a victim and I'm able to heal from that.
And I want to add before we get to the next question, my framing around using the word victim is because there was this term that I remember hearing a while, maybe about less than 10 years ago, the deserving victim versus undeserving victim. And there is a lot of bias and racism in those definitions. So I'm using the term victim also because of the historical context from not too long ago, where what exactly is a deserving victim? Is it someone who's a survivor of sex assault, sexual harm, but they happen to be BIPOC and maybe part of a street organization? Their victimization is undeserving. So that's also my motivation, how I've learned to use the term victim.
Thanks, everyone. We have a couple more. So this one's long, so stay with me. I'll read it and then I'll go back and maybe read it again if I need to. So this question is why people have the myths that male survivors become perpetrators. And then the person explains, in 2023 in Japan, BBC produced a documentary called Predators.
Mhm.
It is on Japanese pop mogul producer Johnny's sexual abuses against 60,000 boys between 11 and 18 from the 1960s. And after this, many journalists and Japanese people, after this, many journalists and Japanese people started to tell that male survivors become abusers. And then there's a YouTube link. So I think, okay, so I think that the broad general question is, why is that myth so prevalent that that male survivors become perpetrators, that abuse prompts something in the survivors to become perpetrators, or I guess anything about that general myth.
Jim, do you want to take that one?
Sure.
Maybe I can answer. Yeah.
Sure. This mythology reflects one of the dangers of how in our culture we receive and process information. Part of the history is that at an earlier point in time, people in the criminal justice area were trying to understand how to deal with sex offenders that were showing up in prison settings, incarceration settings. And the research was done to find out what happened in their lives. And it was true that most offenders were discovered they had a history of sexual harm. The problem was the research stopped there, and we began to talk about how that's kind of A leaves to B. Sexual abuse leads to becoming an offender. And it was true that offenders had histories of victimization, but it really wasn't until our movement to work with survivors began to emerge that we said, have we asked the question of survivors, are you an offender? And the truth is that most survivors are not offenders, while most offenders are survivors. So we didn't ask both sides, and that myth kind of got encased in our history and our belief system. And ever since, it's been hard to unravel. And because males historically are seen as more aggressive, as more acting out our feelings rather than going to talk about our feelings, that myth just kind of stays ingrained in our culture, but it's a myth, not a truth.
I have nothing to add. Spot on, Jim.
Yeah, so it looks like we have a couple more. So how do male survivors cope with the stress to conduct peer support groups in isolated environments?
Okay, so I guess so MenHealing, we do have support groups that are peer led, and for us, how we've been supporting our facilitators, they're survivors who've been through our weekends, they're part of our community, and we provide ongoing supervision for them and check-ins for them, so they can when they're running their groups. So that is how we've been able to support our peer facilitators. We do regular check-ins with them. They have support because we know that they're close. They're having conversations that can hit home, close to home for many of them. So it's important to have that ongoing support from us here at MenHealing, and we have an amazing supervisor who does that for them, and she's brilliant. So that's how we support. Now, I would always say, once again, you can't do this on an island. You can't do this by yourself. When MenHealing, we do our weekends of recovery. We have 2 facilitators in each group. Once again, we believe you can't do this on an island.
And if I could just also add,
Sure.
this is where organizations like ours can be a help. It's really hard. Local agencies sometimes don't have the capacity to offer an additional group, and or maybe you have like 1 or 2 male survivors who show up, you can't get a group going. One of the values is that we're working virtually so we can go across geography, and maybe we have one survivor from California, maybe one from New York, one from Illinois, whatever. That can comprise a group when we do it virtually in a way that you couldn't do locally. So that's where we really invite and encourage local agencies to let us know how we can be able to do that. And again, we think it's important that there be peer leadership, peer-to-peers in some of those groups, rather than just people showing up for the experts or the professionals to provide the service. So we want to spread the word in terms of training peers. And it helps peers when they're trained to be able to give back from their own healing to serve others.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more, and we still have time. So someone asked, sexual harm often is done within the context of long-standing neglect, abandonment, emotional and physical abuse. How do these forms of abuse interact with treatment of sexual harm?
Sharon, Jim, you want to take that, or when you want to take it, or you want me to take it?
Well, I'll just chime in again. Again, another example of how in our culture we get caught so much in boxes and things become binary. And one of the things that we don't notice from my experience over the years, how many survivors were living in situations where there was neglect or deprivation of some sort. That may have been the circumstance, that was the context in which the victimization, the sexual harm was even allowed to happen. So yes, we do have to address, that is the unseen elephant in the room, so to speak, for a lot of times, is to uncover and address the neglect that may have been an underpinning or may have surrounded the sexual harm.
Yeah. All right, Jim. I got nothing to add once again.
Thanks, Jim. We have a question. It's a bit long, so I'm sort of processing. So because it has to do with something that was a sidebar kind of that was happening in the chat, and so the person is asking if a survivor or a victim is adamantly against the usage of pronouns. I assume that means like specific pronouns, or has similar ideals, or has questions that are deemed, I see, that are deemed transphobic. How would you navigate that? And the person is worried about the automatic labeling of someone being transphobic. We know we will work with individuals who have different views, beliefs, religions, etc. We must have open dialogue with everyone in order to further knowledge and understanding of other experiences. And if we don't agree, maintaining the basic level of respect is so important. And I'll just take this because, again, I want to refer back to our role as advocates. And I think our role as advocates exists alongside this fact that we have different beliefs, views, and religions. So of course we have different beliefs and views, and that's why we have core values and principles as advocates, so we can look to those. So again, active listening, supporting a survivor, working with a survivor to support their self-determination when power has been taken away from them. Those are all things that we do as advocates. And so I think I would sort of flip the question to point out that it's really not about our different views, beliefs, and religions so much as how can we fulfill our role as an advocate. And if someone feels that they can't do that, that their beliefs are in conflict with core principles of being an advocate and working with a survivor, then I would suggest that isn't a good role for them to have. They maybe shouldn't be working with survivors in this way. So I'm just going to leave that question there. Another person asked, oh, I'm sorry, Ken, I don't mean to.
No, I was saying thanks, Louis.
So someone asked, I offer a workshop for male survivors on a college campus and often get only 1 to 3 participants. And so the person wants to know any advice on how to get more male survivors to come.
Let me jump in and answer that. I've got a lot of experience with this. I had the opportunity to relocate a couple of times in my life from where I was living. And interestingly, each time when we had trouble getting a male survivor group started, what we did is we then turned around and offered group for men who are dealing with relationship problems, dealing with managing distress in their lives. And in each occasion, when we made the invitation about those kind of symptoms or lifestyle, the men who register for those groups, about 90 to 100% of the men were survivors. They just didn't identify as survivors, and that was not their entry point. So I just encourage you to reach out to more generic men's group around issues of relationship difficulties, problems, managing things in your life. And I would suspect then if you engage in the narrative and the conversation about tell me about your life, you're going to discover that a lot of them have had sexual harm, which is the underpinning for why they're having the problems that they are trying to deal with.
Looks like Jim is typing an answer to our final question. So, Kenton, I'll just ask if you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up.
All right. If there's one thing I would want to leave you all with as practitioners working with survivors, radical curiosity. Whatever's when people in front of you, stay as curious as you can. And because when you stay curious, the possibilities that you can open up to in the engagement with the client is powerful. So radical curiosity, and thank you all for being here. And yeah, that's all I got.
Thanks so much, Kenton. Thanks, Jim and Sharon, for supporting the questions and the Q&A. And thanks to everyone for joining today and for your participation. And of course, we thank the whole team that made this happen. Thanks to our ASL interpreters, our live Spanish interpreters, our captioner, and the team at NSVRC who works behind the scenes to produce and record and get this out into the world. So we appreciate all of you, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks.